And welcome back to another episode of Endless Fiddling. So, yesterday I did a second video on tree saddles and tree climbing, and did kind of a brief demonstration of the climb, the setup, the adjustment, and the climb. And I wanted to show some of the elements, the parts of the system that I intend to use this fall, and some thoughts on it. Some things I've even changed a little bit since yesterday. So I'm going to start with the saddle. This is the saddle that I made. The 550 paracord. It's I'd have to go back and measure what I started with, but what I did was these rungs here are one continuous piece that wraps around, and it gets passed through this tubular webbing on each end. This just keeps the end neat and keeps the abrasion off of the paracord. This is not the fall restraint part of the system. The fall restraint is I'm using this tubular webbing, climb rated webbing for that. We use a water knot. There's a bunch of videos on YouTube where the guys would tie these water knots, and then you back them up with the overhand knot. But you have to really watch them, because they're known to, if you snag, the climbers have been killed because their harness comes undone, but mountain climbers. But if you snag, you can snag this and pull the knot open. So minimum, you have a rather long tail tied in a backup knot, this overhand knot, or better yet, they should be sewn. So it'd be laid along here and then sewn with a really high tensile nylon thread. So that's that. I do my own version of a kind of like a Swiss seat that works with the saddle. I try to size both of them so that when I have my hunting clothes on for November, northern Michigan, November deer season, this fits tight enough when it's tied up with the harness that the weight between the two is pretty much evenly distributed. And I guess I should mention the disclaimer here. Kind of skipped over that, but you know, don't do anything I'm doing here. If you're gonna be climbing, you do so at your own risk, and I'm not an authority on the subject, so none of the things I say here is given with authority or intent as advice on what you should do. So that's my this is my my fall restraint, and I have another harness that I can put on and underneath that to tie is wider. It's a 2-inch nylon strap, more like a seatbelt strap. So this harness, you've got one continuous loop goes around this way, and then we got 2, 4, 6, 7. So we have seven strands this way to keep all this spacing, and I believe they call this a crown knot. Each one of these knots is a crown knot. If you look, you see this. You see this side. It looks like this, and this side has essentially where that strand crosses, and I can demonstrate that knot. This is how cargo nets are made. This type of knot. Seems that it doesn't over tighten. And you can come back and adjust these if you don't get the spacing right. They lock down pretty good with when they're weighted, but at the same time they can be untied pretty well. So I'm gonna say this is size for me, and the other clothes that I'm wearing when I hunt. But the way, and when I made this, I started on the middle. You don't want to start on one end, but you'd end up with unless you really, you really figured out the how much material each knot uses to start from one end and work your way over. But if you start in the middle, it draws the ends in, because these from end to end, this shortens as you add more rungs. Each knot takes, I think it was like a 1.5 inches of this line and this line, somewhere around 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches. So, but there's let's say, like, out with all these knots, there's someone on YouTube that'll show you how to tie them. But what essentially is the way I do it is I make an S. Start with the S, and then this line would be let me come through here. This way. Come around and through, and then we come around it. Oh, it's not going to be right. Let's see. Essentially, that's what happens. Is each one of these will form an S that goes over and under, and you have it when you can draw it up. You dress this knot, and I believe they actually they also call this a crown knot. But you draw it up. It'll look like that. It'll look like that on the other side. So that's that. That's once you've got one, you got it figured out. you can just do them all that same way. Well, that's that. So I had a, when we tied in, what we ended up with was we had the saddle, the two loops from the saddle, and then there's 2 loops from this Swiss seat type of climbing harness, like that. And we had this, this is just a length of this climb rated rope. But the way I attach, some people want to use a carabiner, but I kind of like to stay away from metallic parts when I'm trying to ambush deer at close range. So we pass this line through all 4, and then we pass it through the loop it forms, and that's a sheet bend. That's a sheet bend that'll bind down on itself and tighten up. It's not pulling out. What I also do is make it a double. Make it a double with kind of a quick release, so that when I put weight on this and it tightens up. It tightens up when I climb back down from the tree. I want to release this. I can pull this out, and I have this slack to untie, not the rest of the way. When I want to take it off. So that's that. We'll come back to this. We come back to how I tie this end into the tie this into the upper, I guess I'm just going to call them stirrups, tree climbing stirrups. Spikes work, but spikes will get you into trouble on public land, and they'll kill the trees on private land just as well. So in the past, when I could, I had them. I made some at one point, and I used them, and they worked. It worked unless you had a whatever species of tree with real thick bark. And what would happen is I slid about 20 feet down a tree with both spikes cut a groove in the bark from the start to ground level, and I was just kind of, it was a controlled descent, but it was I couldn't stop it, and it was not really fast. It just I just couldn't stop it. So I don't want to repeat that. So anyway, let's start with the one I used for the left, and both of these setups are pretty similar. Again, it's just I think this is Samson rope. It's kind of thick. I mean, you could get away with a smaller diameter for sure, and then a smaller diameter, some kind of tubing. If you don't have that, the rope tends to droop, and you're trying to lift it. And if you have this stiff tubing on it, it's a little easier to get a hold of it and then just slide it up the tree. Another thing I consider doing is adding a spring steel, like a spring steel wire inside of here, so not the full length. I'd say whatever that 9 or 10 inches might be about the smallest tree I might use. So you wouldn't want it any more length from the knot here around to about this point. But that would keep it from losing that shape. If you can keep this circle pretty solid, it slides up the tree and the climb goes pretty quick. So those are the thoughts on that. This is a tugboat bowline. It doesn't have the reputation that a regular bowline has, where the line comes out into the loop. This tag end comes out into the loop. They have a tendency, they can pull out when the load on them is when it varies. So when the load is, it's off and on and off and on, and they can tend to work their way out. So there are other bowlines. There's a double bowline. I'm gonna grab this and demonstrate that. Double bowline would work. And the double bowline is just, rather than making the one loop here, we make two. We start with two. And we come up through, around, and in. And that's, so there's this double bowline, but to make it a little bit better yet, we want to come back out along this line here. So we come through, and then we come around, and then we're going to follow this line back up and out here. I'm going to address we'll address this original bowline loop here first, and then dress this one on top after. And that's what it looks like. It's at a glance, it looks similar to what they call Yosemite finish, but the Yosemite finish has, if you tie it wrong, has a tendency to become not any knot at all whatsoever. And if you're hanging on that, gravity can take over, and we don't want that. So this tugboat bowline is another good one. I haven't had any problems with it, and I like how, especially for this, I put the lower stirrup on the left hand, and then this tag end is down out of the way. It doesn't interfere in here. So that's that. This, on both of them, it's a way to get a hold of this knot without getting your knuckles into the bark of the tree, and get a hold of this. And then what it also does is, when you have this around the tree, and the tree here, and this line comes through, allows this gap here. Whereas if you just were on this line, the gap can be really small, and not so much on the lower stirrup, but on the one that you attach above it will interfere with it over here. Will interfere. So if you have that gap, this lower one can slide up easier. That's what we're doing there. And then on this stirrup, and I believe this is a Predator line, Samson Predator. It's just or maybe not Predator. It's the equivalent. They have a Predator that's like a camo pattern, which eventually I might go to, and I might go to this diameter line for this part, and then even a smaller diameter. This stuff is really strong. Strong as it's as strong as steel cable, same diameter. So you're not going to break it with your own weight. And I have I use in this case I have 2 taut line hitches. This side is the upper side. It hangs this way. So we come around, wrap here first, and when we put our weight, put a foot in here, put a weight in here. These bind to this line. They won't slide. The only way to slide them is to grab them right at the knot. You can move them up and down. If they get too tight, you kind of break them open. You work them open, and then they'll slide a little easier. So you put your weight on them. So that's that. These I haven't had these loosen up or slide out on me. You could, if you were worried about it, you could once you set the once you adjust the height, you can throw an overhand knot on the bottom side here. This I have another taut line hitch here, and then just this tag end. So this can the stirrup goes under your instep, of course, and then this loop will go around your around the ankle portion of your boots, and then tighten down just to ensure that your foot doesn't come out of this stirrup. So that's the left stirrup, the lower one. The right hand, and you know, maybe if you're left-handed, you might prefer to reverse these, but the right hand, this is the upper, and I give it a little more of a wrap here to provide that gap, this gap here. So when I tied in yesterday, when I first set my taut line hitch to connect it to my harness, okay, you have I had this knot right here. I'll give it more slack. We come around twice. That's up the tree. This direction here is down to our foot. And then this comes around, comes through here twice. Now this could be 3 loops in here. It was all fine in the beginning. When I set it, I put my weight on it. And something happened when I think what happened was, so now let's see, we get it to set. Yeah, it's set right away. Pulling on it pretty hard. And you could just, you keep tightening it up. What happened yesterday is it started slipping on me after I climbed. So I thought about it more, because what we want to do, we want enough slack in this line to our saddle so that when we pull this up the tree and our right foot goes up, that this line does not interfere. Yet it's there to catch us if we, something goes wrong and we let go. This pulls down, and this and our harness will cinch this down around the tree. So this started slipping on me, and I started thinking about ways to ameliorate that problem. And so there's a couple ways. There's a couple things you could do. Now this line doesn't have a it doesn't have a lot of extra really, but we could do a alpine butterfly to put a loop in this. So once it's around the tree, we don't know how big our tree is going to be until we get to it. So then we want to put a loop here. We do this alpine butterfly. We go 3 times around. This is one way to tie it and come around, pull the center out here, and then go through all these. So now we have the loop, a midline loop, and then our harness could get tied in here. Now you could tie it in with a sheep bend, like we did the other end, right? We come around here and come through, and there's a sheep bend. That's one way to do it, and that's not bad. I mean, you could, once you got the height, you could even loosen this, pull this up, pull that, and that's your adjustment. Neither one of these are going to slip. The other way, since I don't have a lot of extra line on this, rather than this alpine butterfly, let's see, rather than that, you can tie this slip knot with this portion of the knot up. And this is not as line hungry of a knot. We could put that there. And then we could either do this sheep bend here. You can do the sheep bend here, or we could go through and now have our taut line hitch. I would start with it close up here. Now it's upside down